Hi everybody. So today, since I'm past 29 weeks pregnant at this point, and I haven't really done a ton of updates, sit-down updates, because really things haven't changed. I have a lot of the classic things. I'm getting really hungry third trimester, thirsty, sleepy. So I decided instead, let's just talk about breastfeeding, because I have some experience with that I think it would have been great for me to hear. So let's talk Rosemary's breastfeeding story. She was my first child. She was born, if you've seen my first video about her and Jack's birth stories, she was born via C-section at 36 weeks and 3 days. And so if you want to watch that story, I can link it in the description. But basically, she came at 5 pounds 9 ounces, and she was technically a preemie. One of the older preemies that you're going to find, but a preemie. And so that, I think, really affected our breastfeeding experience. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit from my perspective and how we overcame that. She was early, and I was not aware of the fact that that was going to make a really big difference in milk supply, potentially. So with her being, it was really only 4 days before she was kind of early term, but it was preemie status still. So she just barely didn't go to the NICU. Basically, they were like, nope, she's okay. We can go to regular. But her blood sugars were low. They were wanting to supplement her in the hospital. I obviously, first baby, just randomly had a C-section, just had colostrum for her. And it wasn't really keeping her blood sugars up, and her body wasn't really ready to come out yet. So she was having low blood sugars and needed something. And I didn't understand that at the time. Like, I kind of wanted to just follow the rules that I had learned as a dietitian about how you do breastfeeding. I wasn't an IBCLC, but we do have some training in life cycle nutrition. So we know a little bit about, feed on demand when they're really young like that, just try to let them nurse as much as they can so they can stimulate milk supply. That was what I was going off of, and I was facing all these things that were sort of a mixture of preemie concerns and regular things. So they were more concerned about her not getting able to breathe because she was so little when she was nursing, and then also just her blood sugar needed to be regulated, and I didn't really know a whole lot about that. And I guess that can have something to do with having newborn seizures. If they get blood sugars too low, it can be pretty serious. So I didn't know that at the time, but I just felt really stressed that I wasn't doing it the way I thought I was supposed to be doing it, and no one was really explaining it to me. But that's all right. So we had to supplement her almost right away just to try to get her blood sugars up, and I wanted a pump, and I saw an IBCLC, and we tried nursing, and she didn't quite lose 10% of her weight in the hospital, so we were discharged, but we had to have a weight check like 2 days later. And so we did that, but she was really small, and I remember crying leaving the hospital because she was so small, and I just felt awful as her mom that we hadn't been able to keep her in longer and that I couldn't really feed her very well. We went home, and I did a little bit of supplementing they told me I really needed to do, in the evening, and then try to nurse all day. But on her weight check, she was still lower. And then we kept trying, we kept doing just supplement in the evenings. But by, I think, her third weight check, which was, I think, about a week after she was born, she had continued to lose weight. She was not gaining weight. And so at that point, they were like, okay, this was at her pediatrician's office. They were saying to me, okay, we do not want her to keep losing weight. This would be not good for her at all. And so I remember my husband saying, I don't want her to end up back in the hospital with a tube down her nose, which he was right. I mean, you just don't want that at all. But it was so defeating. And so it had been about a week, and I really still didn't have very much milk at all. We tried pumping to see how much there might be, and I know that does not show you the whole supply of milk. Usually if you talk to IBCLCs, you will hear that. That's not necessarily the whole story. However, the definition for low milk supply, from what I understand medically, has a lot to do with whether the baby is gaining weight. So in our case, we couldn't pump very much and the baby wasn't drinking very much, and the weight was developing to show that that was the case. So we had a pretty good idea that this particular baby and this particular mommy was not getting the transfer of milk or even perhaps the stimulation of milk production that we needed. So they gave me a regimen to do, which I really wish, honestly, that I had been given this right away in the hospital, that I'd been told, you have an early baby, there's a really good chance your milk supply is not going to come in very well. Because apparently that is not uncommon. But it was just something that I wasn't told. And so I was supposed to pump, I think it was like every 3 hours, at least, if not more. And so we were supposed to do feedings at least that often, at least 8 feedings a day. And we would go through the whole cycle. So we would feed Rosemary, nursing her, and then supplement her. It was like, I think at least so many ounces, maybe 1 or 2 early on like that. Very little, because it might have even been less, maybe only an ounce or a half an ounce when she was really little, but supplementing a certain amount every time we did the feeding. And then after I had nursed her and supplemented her, I was pumping. So I had to do a pumping session until, basically I wasn't getting anything more out. And I felt like I responded relatively slowly to the pump. It was relatively consistent and slow, so it took a long time. So I would end up having like this hour and a half of feeding regimens and cleaning all the stuff, and then we'd have an hour and a half break, and then I'd do it all over again. And that was how life was for a very long time. But that regimen is probably the primary way that I was able to get my milk supply to start coming up. The pump that I used was Medela pump-in style. So it was the double pump. And basically I had to figure out what flange sizes I needed. At first I didn't really know. I wasn't really comfortable with pumping, so I just used the standard ones. I did end up getting a slightly different size for each side. That actually helps a lot. So finding the right flange that fits your body is important. So if you don't know what a flange is, that's just the piece that attaches to you. So if you don't have the right size and it's not lined up right, it's not gonna work as well. But we messed around with all that. I got better at getting the suction to line up well. I worked on kind of hand expressing while I was pumping from one side to the other so that I could get my body to kind of release more milk. And we just did that over and over and over again. I took fenugreek, and then for a while, for 2 weeks, my doctor put me on Reglan about 2 months in, and that helped too. So I was slowly building up this supply, and we were supplementing. And then as time went on, we were getting closer to where I didn't have to supplement her as much of a percentage of her milk, and I was able to do more of it just by pumping and nursing her. By the time that Reglan was over, my supply did dip back down. That Reglan treatment, for me anyway, was sort of just a boost for the time being, and then just trying to maintain it. So that's a side effect of Reglan. It's kind of an off-label thing that the doctor had given me to try. And then when Rosemary was about to go to daycare for the first time, and I was going to go back to work, I was pretty close to having enough milk for her, but we still needed to bring some formula. So I brought formula for the first day of daycare. And then at work I pumped, and I basically pumped enough to replace all of the milk that I had sent between the pump at work, because I think I did 2 pumps at work, and then a pump at night. And I also would wake up and pump in the middle of the night, even if she didn't wake up. I would still wake up and pump to make sure I was getting that milk and having my body still make more throughout the night. Between all of that, I had enough milk for her, and that was enough for me to not have to give her formula anymore. So I kept it up. I probably still, even after 3 months, pumped 6 times, sometimes 8 times a day, between 6 and 8 times a day. And that was enough, but it was work. And so I was really happy because I'd finally just barely gotten enough milk to support her needs. But it was difficult because it seemed like every bottle that I was giving her, she drank it so much easier, and then I'd have to work really hard to pump the milk back out. So that was a challenge. But suffice it to say, I do think it's worth knowing that primarily, I think the thing that helped me the most was just consistently pumping. And, of course I stayed hydrated. People say all these things, eat the oatmeal, stay hydrated, whatever. I did all this. I was pretty well nourished the whole time. But for me, it just seemed like the success came from pumping really consistently, being really devoted to it. And I think if I were going to tell somebody one thing, it would be that, like, learn how to pump for your body and do it consistently. That was really exciting. I actually really never thought I was going to get full supply, and then by 3 months there it was, and it was hard to keep up, but I was so happy to be able to do that. And Rosemary actually continued to nurse and then have pump milk at childcare or daycare or wherever she was, all the way up through the first year. And then I didn't bring it for childcare anymore because she was on solid. I just didn't bring milk after that, but I still nursed her, and she nursed until she was a little over 2. So in the end, after the initial struggle was really hard, but I didn't really have to pump anymore, and I didn't really have to do anything besides just nurse her whenever we wanted to nurse for a whole year, that year from 1 to 2. And so I was really thankful that I stuck it out. Also, with Jack, I had been nursing Rosemary up through he was 20 weeks gestation or so when she weaned. So I was already pregnant with him by the time she weaned, when she was just over 2. So I only had maybe 6 months or something. I'm not sure, I didn't do the math, but it's about that, of a break between nursing Rosemary and nursing Jack. And so when he was born, I had tons of colostrum. He nursed great. He was big, so they wanted to measure his blood sugars, but I was not concerned that time. And he just took a ton of colostrum. And so it was really a learning experience because he came at 40 weeks and I want to say 5 days. And he was just a different baby. He had so much more cheek fat, which makes it easier for them to suck. He was just way more vigorous. It was way easier for him to get milk out, and it showed. He had way more intake of just colostrum, and the milk came in within like a day, maybe 2. I think it was a day. I think I was still in the hospital the next day when I first saw mature milk. So he was just a very different experience. I started pumping right away with him so that I would have an easy backup supply. I wasn't going back to work because I'd been injured with a neck injury. So I wasn't going back to work. I had just stopped working and was going to be staying at home. But it was just for like babysitting and if I wanted to have a glass of wine or something. So just to have a way for Dad to feed baby or to go out and do something and let someone else feed the baby, I wanted to have a milk supply. Well, what ended up happening is I did so well with that I actually had more than I needed to use. It wasn't awful, it wasn't uncomfortable. I could have just stopped pumping so much, but I kept it up because there was someone I knew who needed milk for her baby who was more premature than Rosemary had been. And so I ended up donating milk to a friend. And it was so cool. It was such a redeeming experience for me because I had been fighting so hard to get milk the first time. And then here I was, having learned so much about how to pump and how to recognize what my body was doing and what it needed, that I was able to pump milk for someone else who needed it and was in a situation like that where they didn't have enough. And that was so cool. So I just wanted to share that because I think in the middle of it, you can feel so frustrated with your body and so just disappointed with how things are going. And A, you're doing the best you can do, and whatever it is that you're getting, you're doing a great work for your baby. And also B, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. It will get easier. You're not guaranteed to have the same problems with the next baby. So there can be a lot of peace in that, I think, and just recognizing that this is not you failing. It's just circumstances are different in different situations. And I think that that was a really good experience for me to have with my second baby. I think too, with this story, I should add, I went really hard on pumping. It was important to me. It was something I wanted to do. And for those of you out there who maybe do want to push that hard, this is what worked for me. I think it's important to say, if that sounds like awful to you and you're in a position where you're having to nurse your baby, maybe they're not even losing weight. Maybe they just are gaining weight, but you have to nurse them every 2 hours all the time. And that is excruciating on you. And it seems like baby's never happy. Yes, that can be a normal, but also I just think it's important for women not to feel guilted into doing nursing when it's not working for them, when it's making their life hard. So if you are feeling like, oh, I don't want to have to pump every 2 hours or 3 hours. I don't want to have to work to get this supply up. My baby's waking me up every hour to eat. Every 2 hours is kind of normal when they're little. But, if it's continuing for a long time, past 6 weeks to 3 months, and you're just tired, I just want to say, I would never expect you to do what I did if you don't want to. And I think that that is something that needs to be said to mamas out there. Like, you are working really hard. You feel free to decide what's best for you, your family, and that baby. Sometimes that means taking care of you. And if that means for you, you don't want to be pumping around the clock, or you want a little help and you want to nurse and supplement, or whatever decision that is, do what you got to do, girl. I really want to make that clear. I support your choice of feeding because that is something that is so much on mom, and you have to decide if it's worth it for you and your baby and your family. So that's my breastfeeding story, and I hope that it is encouraging. Go ahead and like and subscribe if you want to see more mommy/baby/nutrition style content, and have a good week.